Unaware of her husband's secret backup plan, Melanie Cole believed she had finally reached the day she had dreamed about for years. The Atlantic stretched endlessly under the morning sun, sparkling as though the world itself was celebrating. The 80-foot luxury yacht glided effortlessly across the waves, its engines humming softly, its white hull gleaming like polished ivory. Daniel Cole, a 52-year-old billionaire who had built his empire from nothing, stood at the railing with a glass of champagne in his hand, his suit jacket off, his face calm and unsuspecting. To him, this was a celebration. He had survived a major surgery, his business was thriving, and his marriage, though strained, seemed to be finding new light. His wife Melanie had suggested this cruise, saying she wanted to toast to second chances. Daniel, ever hopeful, had chosen to believe her. But behind him, Melanie's expression betrayed her true intentions. The sea breeze played with her dark hair, whipping it against her flawless face, but her eyes remained fixed, cold, calculating. She wore a white sundress that fluttered against her tanned legs, her beauty almost angelic to any outsider. Yet inside, her heart beat with greed. Beside her stood Ethan Ward, Daniel's younger associate, a man whose charm masked his ruthlessness. For 2 years, Ethan had been more than just a business partner to Melanie. He was her secret lover, her partner in both desire and in crime. And today, he was her partner in murder. They had planned this moment carefully. Daniel's empire, his shipping company, his real estate holdings, his offshore accounts, was valued at over $3 billion. With Daniel gone, Melanie stood to inherit everything. Ethan, the man she promised to share it all with, would finally have the life he craved, wealth, power, and freedom. No lawyers. No messy divorces. No drawn-out battles. Just one accident at sea, and Daniel Cole would vanish forever. "Say hello to the sharks, darling," Melanie whispered. Before Daniel could even register the words, Ethan pressed his palm firmly against the billionaire's back. It wasn't a violent shove, it didn't need to be. Daniel was caught off guard, his balance already compromised by the sway of the yacht. His glass tumbled from his hand, shattering against the deck as his body toppled forward. The splash was sudden, loud, final. Salt water stung his eyes and filled his lungs as he kicked desperately, fighting against the weight of his expensive clothes. Above him, the yacht didn't stop. The engines roared louder as it sped away, leaving a trail of white foam across the blue horizon. Melanie and Ethan stood at the stern, their silhouettes sharp against the sun. She raised her glass in mock salute. He spoke quickly into his phone, "It's done. Prepare the papers. The empire is ours." They believed Daniel Cole was gone. They believed the ocean would swallow him, leaving nothing but a tragic headline, "Billionaire lost at sea." But what they didn't know was that Daniel had been preparing for betrayal long before this day. And the moment his body cut through the waves, his secret backup plan, a hidden insurance against greed, lies, and death itself, was already in motion. How could a man shoved off a yacht by his wife and her lover possibly fight back? What kind of backup plan could save him from betrayal worth $3 billion? And most importantly, what shocking move would he make when he returned to confront the people who left him for dead? Sit back, grab your popcorn, and let's dive into this interesting story. The betrayal on the yacht hadn't come out of nowhere. To understand it, you have to look at the hours leading up to that terrible moment, the illusion Daniel Cole allowed himself to believe, and the way Melanie played her role to perfection. The morning had begun in their Boston penthouse overlooking the Charles River. Daniel awoke to the surprising sight of Melanie preparing breakfast. She almost never cooked, yet there she was, dressed in silk, humming softly as she set out toast, fruit, and freshly brewed coffee. The scent filled the room with warmth that felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. "I thought we could start the day together," she said with a soft smile, her voice laced with sweetness. Daniel, who had grown used to her coldness in recent months, felt a wave of hope. Maybe things were changing. Maybe his marriage was healing. When she suggested a private yacht cruise to celebrate his recovery and their love, Daniel's heart swelled. He had spent 6 weeks recovering from surgery, and the loneliness of that time had made him desperate for Melanie's attention. "Just the three of us," she had said casually, referring to Ethan, whom she claimed was only joining to discuss a new business deal. Daniel had no reason to suspect anything more sinister. At the marina, the yacht gleamed like a floating palace, its chrome railings shining under the sun. Ethan was already waiting, sunglasses perched on his face, his tailored shirt unbuttoned just enough to flaunt his easy confidence. "Daniel. You're looking strong," he greeted warmly, clasping Daniel's shoulder like an old friend. Daniel smiled back, oblivious to the undercurrent between Ethan and Melanie, mistaking their stolen glances for mere camaraderie. Once aboard, champagne flowed freely. Melanie poured with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, topping up Daniel's glass again and again. She laughed at his jokes, touched his hand tenderly, and even leaned her head on his shoulder for a moment as the yacht pushed off into the open waters. To Daniel, it felt like a long-lost romance rekindled. To Melanie, it was a calculated performance, each gesture designed to disarm him, to keep him blind to what was coming. The first hour passed pleasantly. The Massachusetts coastline shrank in the distance, and the sea opened wide around them. Ethan chatted about investments, hinting at new opportunities in the Caribbean. Melanie giggled as she adjusted her sun hat, leaning into Daniel with the ease of a devoted wife. For Daniel, who had built an empire with grit and sleepless nights, moments like these were priceless. He thought he was finally reclaiming the family warmth he had lost when his father passed, when his mother left, and when his marriage began to cool. But beneath the warmth, cracks were showing. Daniel noticed the way Melanie's eyes lingered on Ethan a little too long, the way their laughter overlapped with perfect timing. He felt a faint unease, but quickly brushed it aside. After all, hadn't Melanie arranged this entire outing for him? Hadn't she said it was about second chances? Daniel chose trust. He chose love. And that choice would lead him straight to the edge of the yacht, where trust and love would betray him in the cruelest way. The sun shimmered high above the yacht, waves glistening like liquid diamonds, but beneath the sparkle, danger quietly brewed. By the second hour at sea, the atmosphere had shifted. The laughter had grown a little too forced, the smiles a little too sharp. Daniel, lulled by champagne and the warmth of the day, almost didn't notice at first. Melanie was the one to begin weaving the trap. Sitting across from Daniel, she leaned forward, her tone casual but her words deliberate. "Darling," she began, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, "have you ever thought about simplifying your estate plans? All these trusts and accounts, it must be exhausting keeping track of everything." Daniel frowned slightly. "It's managed by my team. That's their job, not mine." Ethan chuckled lightly, swirling his drink. "Of course, but probate can be so complicated. Courts take forever, lawyers charge obscene fees. You wouldn't want Melanie caught in all that legal mess if something ever happened to you." The suggestion landed like a stone in Daniel's stomach. Something about the way Ethan said it, too smooth, too rehearsed, made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Nothing is happening to me," Daniel said firmly, though his words carried a defensive edge. Melanie reached over, placing her hand over his. Her touch was soft, her smile carefully crafted to look reassuring. "Of course not, love. I didn't mean it like that. I just think, we should be prepared. For the future. You've worked so hard to build everything. Wouldn't it be best if it all stayed safe, with us?" Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "With us?" "Yes," she answered sweetly. "With me. With Ethan helping manage the business side. You deserve peace of mind." As Melanie spoke, Daniel noticed Ethan subtly angling his phone. Not openly recording, but pretending to take a selfie, ensuring Daniel's face was in the frame each time he raised his glass. It was subtle, but to a man who had built an empire by noticing details, the act was not lost on him. A knot began to form in Daniel's gut. The surgery, the painkillers, the days when Melanie insisted on handling paperwork because he shouldn't stress. The way Ethan always seemed to be around, conveniently supportive, too available. And now, questions about his will, inheritance, and the future. Daniel set his glass down. "I'd like to head back to shore soon," he said evenly. The air shifted instantly. Ethan's smile faltered. Melanie's eyes hardened, the mask slipping for the briefest second. Her hand withdrew from his, her fingers curling around her glass instead. "Daniel," she said, her voice carrying an edge now. "Don't be ridiculous. We're out here to celebrate. You've been under so much stress. You need to relax." Ethan leaned forward, his voice lower, steadier, more dangerous. "Or maybe," he said, "you're too tired to see what's best for you." Daniel's heart pounded. Something was terribly wrong. The celebration had never been about love, or healing, or second chances. It had been about this moment, testing how far they could push him, how much he would swallow before the trap snapped shut. The breeze had shifted. What once felt refreshing now cut against Daniel's skin with a chill he couldn't ignore. The champagne bubbles that had tickled his throat minutes earlier now sat bitter in his stomach. He could feel it, something was coming. Ethan leaned casually against the rail, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp and watchful, like a predator biding its time. Melanie sat across from Daniel, her sundress flowing, her face calm, almost angelic, but her words carried a strange finality. "You've been different lately," she said, sipping her drink slowly. "Forgetful. Distracted. Sometimes I wonder if you're even the same man I married." Daniel straightened. "What are you talking about?" Ethan interjected smoothly, "It's not unusual at your age. After surgery, on all those medications, it's understandable. But we have to think about your future, Daniel. You can't run an empire forever." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to shut the conversation down, but their voices wove together too perfectly, like rehearsed lines from a script. Then, as if confirming his suspicion, Melanie reached into her beach tote and pulled out a slim folder. She placed it on the table between them. "Just some documents. For protection, of course. If you sign, everything will be simple. The assets will transfer, and you won't have to worry. Ethan and I will handle the rest." Daniel stared at the folder, his heart thudding. He didn't touch it. His hand instead tightened around the arm of his chair. "No," he said quietly. Melanie's expression froze, her smile faltering. Ethan's jaw clenched. For a moment, the yacht's gentle hum was the only sound. Then Melanie stood slowly, walking toward him. Her sandals clicked softly against the polished deck. She leaned closer, her voice low, her breath warm against his ear. "Daniel, stop being difficult. This can be easy, or it can be very hard." Daniel pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the deck. "I'm not signing anything," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Take me back to shore. Now." The mask slipped completely. Ethan stepped forward, no longer pretending to be the charming associate. His eyes were ice. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen." Daniel's heart pounded as he realized the truth. He wasn't just being manipulated. He was being cornered. Every detail, the champagne, the questions, the recording on Ethan's phone, had been part of a plan. A plan that ended with him losing everything. And maybe more. Daniel turned, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a brief second, he thought about making a run for it, grabbing the radio, jumping into the cabin. But then he felt it, a soft push at his back. Not violent, but firm, deliberate. Melanie's voice followed, a whisper sharp as glass. "Say hello to the sharks, darling." The world tilted. The rail slipped from his grip. He fell forward, weightless for a heartbeat before the ocean swallowed him whole. The water was icy, shocking his system. Salt burned his throat as he thrashed, his tailored clothes dragging him down. Above, muffled through the roar of waves, he heard Ethan's voice on the phone. "It's done. Prepare the papers. The empire is ours." The yacht's engines roared louder. It cut across the sea like a predator fleeing the scene, shrinking into the horizon. They didn't look back. To them, Daniel Cole was gone. But as his body fought against the cold depths, one thought burned in his mind. They don't know about my backup plan. The ocean showed no mercy. Saltwater clawed at Daniel's lungs as he kicked furiously, struggling against the heavy drag of his soaked clothes. His chest burned, his limbs screamed, but his mind refused to let go. The image of Melanie's smirk as she whispered those words fueled him. The empire he had built, the legacy he had fought for, the billions he had protected, it couldn't end like this. The yacht was gone now, a shrinking dot swallowed by the horizon. Alone in the endless blue, the vastness of the Atlantic pressed in on him, whispering of death. His vision blurred. His breaths came in shallow gasps. His body began to sink. Then, faintly through the hiss of waves, came the grumble of an engine. Daniel forced his eyes open. A weather-beaten fishing trawler was cutting across the waves not far from him. He summoned the last of his strength, raising his arm above the water. "Help," he tried to scream, though seawater stole half the sound. The trawler veered. A man's voice shouted over the waves. "Over there." Tyler, grab the line. Two figures leaned over the side. A thick rope splashed into the water, landing just inches from Daniel's reach. He lunged, fingers grasping. The world tilted, black spots dancing across his vision, but he clung on. Hands, rough, calloused, strong, hauled him upward. With a heave, he was dragged onto the deck, coughing up seawater, chest heaving like a man reborn. "Holy hell," the older man muttered, kneeling beside him. His face was lined, tanned by decades at sea. His flannel shirt smelled of salt and motor oil. "Lady Trouble throw you overboard, or did you just fancy a swim?" Daniel coughed violently, spitting seawater onto the wooden deck. He tried to speak, but his voice came out broken. "My wife, they tried to kill me." The man's eyes narrowed. "Name's Jake Morrison," he said, gripping Daniel's shoulder firmly. "This here's my grandson, Tyler." The boy, no more than 17, handed Daniel a wool blanket, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. Jake wrapped the blanket around Daniel, his grip steady, his voice grave. "You're safe now. But if what you're saying is true, you're in more danger than just drowning." Daniel's lips trembled, but his gaze burned with clarity. "Listen to me, no Coast Guard, no police. Not yet. They think I'm dead, and I need it to stay that way." Jake studied him carefully, suspicion flickering across his weathered features. He had seen desperate men before, fishermen lost at sea, smugglers running from the law, but this was different. Daniel's words carried the weight of a man who had been hunted by his own blood. "You in some kind of trouble?" Jake asked cautiously. Daniel met his eyes, his voice low but steady. "Yes. The kind of trouble worth $3 billion. The deck fell silent except for the slap of waves against the hull. Jake leaned back slowly, a grim smile curling at the edge of his lips. "Then it looks like fate threw you onto the right boat. Because if you're planning to fight back, you're gonna need a compass." The trawler cut steadily across the waves, heading toward a secluded cove Daniel didn't recognize. Wrapped in Jake's heavy wool blanket, he sat hunched near the stern, every muscle aching, but his mind razor-sharp. Saltwater still clung to his hair, dripping into his eyes, but his thoughts were no longer about survival. They were about war. Jake leaned against the wheelhouse, studying him. "You gonna tell me what a man like you is doing out here, half drowned, claiming his wife tried to kill him? Daniel exhaled slowly, his voice low but steady. My name is Daniel Cole. I own Cole Global Shipping and multiple real estate holdings. My net worth is over $3 billion. Tyler's jaw dropped. Wait, you mean that Daniel Cole? The billionaire? Jake shot his grandson a look. Quiet, boy. Let him speak. Daniel's gaze hardened. My wife Melanie and her lover shoved me off that yacht to take it all. But what they don't know, he paused, his lips curling faintly, is that I've been planning for something like this. Jake raised a brow. You planned for your own wife to try and murder you? Not exactly, Daniel admitted. But when you've built something worth billions, you don't survive by trusting blindly. You prepare. Quietly. Carefully. He shifted under the blanket. For years, I suspected Melanie's loyalty wasn't to me, but to the lifestyle. Her spending grew reckless. Her eyes wandered. And Ethan, my so-called associate, was too ambitious, too eager to get close. So I made contingencies. Jake crossed his arms. What kind of contingencies? Daniel's voice lowered. Backup accounts. Secret trusts. A legal framework hidden even from my board of directors. I also hired someone, a private investigator. Danny Crawford. Former FBI. He's been following Melanie and Ethan for months. The fisherman whistled softly. Smart man. Daniel nodded. If Melanie ever tried to betray me, if Ethan ever overstepped, Danny would have evidence. Documents. Photos. Everything I'd need to destroy them legally and publicly. And now, he clenched his fists, now they think I'm dead. Which means they'll be sloppy. They'll celebrate too soon. And when they do, I'll be ready. Jake's eyes studied him, weighing the steel in his words. This wasn't just some rich man drowning in self-pity. This was a fighter. So, what's the play? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes dark with determination. First, I need to stay invisible. If Melanie and Ethan believe the ocean claimed me, they'll push through their plan. File documents. Transfer assets. They'll leave a trail. Meanwhile, Danny gathers everything we need to expose them, and the people helping them. And then? Jake asked. Then, Daniel said, his voice sharp as a blade, I come back. Not just alive. But with proof that sends them both to prison for the rest of their lives. The trawler slowed as it entered a hidden cove, sheltered by jagged rocks. A modest bed and breakfast sat tucked against the shore, smoke rising from its chimney. Jake pointed. That's Mrs. Chen's place. Off the books, no questions asked. You'll be safe there. Daniel stood, legs shaky but his resolve firm. The cold betrayal of the yacht still clung to him, but inside, something hotter was burning. Melanie and Ethan thought they had won. They thought the ocean had swallowed him. But Daniel Cole was alive. And his backup plan had just begun. News travels fast when a billionaire dies at sea. Within 24 hours, headlines screamed across every financial and social network. Daniel Cole presumed dead after yacht tragedy. Billionaire's widow devastated after shocking accident. The story painted a heartbreaking picture. Daniel, weakened from recent surgery, had slipped overboard. Melanie, grief-stricken, and Ethan, a close family friend, had done everything they could but couldn't save him. Witnesses? None. The ocean, they claimed, had swallowed its victim whole. Sitting in the corner of Mrs. Chen's kitchen, Daniel read the articles on an old laptop she kept for guests. Each photo cut deeper, the staged tears, Melanie's elegant black dress as she addressed reporters, Ethan's steady hand on her shoulder. They looked the part perfectly, the grieving widow and her supportive confidant. Jake leaned over Daniel's shoulder, his expression hard. They're playing it well. You wouldn't know it was all a lie. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's exactly what makes it dangerous. They're not just pretending. They're rewriting my story. The following week, the funeral was announced. A private yet extravagant ceremony at Boston's most prestigious cemetery. Melanie spared no expense: designer flowers, a mahogany casket polished to a mirror finish, a choir humming solemn hymns. It was a performance for the elite, designed to cement the illusion that she was a heartbroken widow, carrying the weight of a $3 billion empire alone. Hidden behind a row of hedges at the far edge of the cemetery, Daniel watched it all unfold. Jake crouched beside him, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The two men looked more like hunters than mourners. Melanie stood at the head of the grave, dressed in black lace, her veil perfectly arranged. Her makeup was smudged just enough to look authentic. She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, but not once did her gaze drop to the empty casket. Ethan remained close at her side, his arm protective, his posture proud, as if already stepping into Daniel's shoes. Guests wept. Old business partners shook their heads in disbelief. Family friends embraced Melanie, whispering condolences. To them, this was tragedy. To Daniel, it was theater. Then he saw something that struck him cold. A group of lawyers lingered at the back of the crowd, documents in hand. Among them was Richard Barnes, his financial advisor, and Patricia Walsh, an estate attorney Daniel had once trusted. Neither looked mournful. They looked busy. Busy ensuring Melanie's transition to sole heir was seamless. Jake lowered the binoculars. Notice who's missing. Daniel nodded grimly. My real allies. The ones who knew me best. They're not here. Which means Melanie didn't invite them, or they know something they can't admit publicly. As the coffin lowered into the ground, Melanie's voice rang out in rehearsed grief. Goodbye, my love. I'll take care of everything you built. Daniel's fists clenched. No. You'll destroy it. Jake put a steady hand on his arm. Patience. Let her bury a ghost. Soon enough, she'll meet the man she thought she drowned. For the first time since the ocean tried to claim him, Daniel allowed himself a thin, dangerous smile. The night after his own funeral, Daniel Cole walked like a ghost through the streets of Beacon Hill. The city he had built half his empire in bustled as usual, but to the world, he was already buried beneath polished mahogany. That illusion gave him a strange kind of freedom. No one was looking for him. No one suspected him. For the first time in decades, Daniel Cole was invisible. Jake had driven him close to his former mansion, parking 3 blocks away. You're sure about this? The fisherman asked, his voice low. Daniel's eyes were fixed on the 3-story brownstone ahead. Its windows glowed with expensive light fixtures, but its heart had changed. I need to know how far they've gone, Daniel replied. And I need proof. He still had a key. Melanie had never thought to demand it back. Moving like a thief in his own house, he slipped through the back door. The scent was different, new perfumes, new colognes, an undertone of Ethan's presence. Every step felt like trespassing in a life that no longer belonged to him. The living room furniture had been rearranged. Designer pieces that weren't his filled the space. The family photos had been replaced too, Melanie and Ethan, smiling together in frames where his face used to be. Daniel's stomach twisted, but he pressed on. In Robert's old study, the room Daniel had once used as his command center, he found what he was looking for. Papers littered the desk, not carelessly but organized in precise stacks. Melanie's handwriting filled the margins of legal forms. Ethan's neat signatures scrawled across drafts of contracts. And then, at the top of one folder, a chilling title stared back at him. The Daniel Project. His jaw tightened as he opened it. Inside, page after page detailed his supposed decline. Fake doctors' reports claiming early dementia. Records of confusion during meetings. Even photographs. Like the one from his last birthday party, where Melanie had forgotten to tell him it was a surprise, capturing his startled expression as evidence of mental instability. Every detail of his life had been twisted into a weapon. His own habits, his quirks, even his recovery from surgery had been catalogued as proof he was unfit to control his empire. Daniel pulled out his phone and began taking photos of everything. The pages, the signatures, the fabricated medical charts. Then he found something worse, a letter signed only with the initials MT. The timeline must accelerate. Daniel is growing suspicious. Recommend moving to Phase 3 immediately. Phase 3. His death. His hands trembled with rage as he snapped the last photo. But then, headlights swept across the window. Voices drifted up the walkway. Melanie and Ethan were home early. Daniel stuffed the documents back and slipped toward the rear exit, his heart pounding in his chest. He crouched low behind the hedges he'd planted years ago, listening as the front door opened. Think the lawyers bought it? Ethan's voice floated into the night. They bought everything, Melanie replied smoothly. By Monday, probate begins. Within 6 weeks, the fortune is ours. Daniel's teeth clenched. Not if his backup plan had anything to say about it. For days, Daniel had stalked the edges of his old life, watching, listening, gathering proof of betrayal. He had seen the lies they told to lawyers and the smiles they performed for the cameras. He had read their forged documents, their fabricated medical records, their entire scheme laid out in black and white. But nothing compared to the moment he finally decided to step out of the shadows. The stage for his return wasn't random, it was deliberate. His former home, the mansion he had poured decades of blood and sweat into, the place where his late father's portrait still hung in the study. To Melanie and Ethan, it was now theirs. To Daniel, it was still his. And tonight, he would take it back. He didn't knock. He didn't hide. He sat in his old leather armchair, the one Melanie had threatened to throw out but never dared because Daniel refused to part with it. It was positioned just right, facing the front door. Waiting. The lock turned. Laughter drifted inside. Melanie's high, theatrical giggle mixed with Ethan's smug chuckle. They stepped in, dripping with wine and self-satisfaction, their shopping bags in hand. But when their eyes landed on him, the world stopped. Daniel sat perfectly still, one leg crossed over the other, his expression calm but deadly. "Hello, darlings," he said, his voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "How was your evening?" Melanie screamed. Not a startled gasp, but a guttural, primal scream, her bags crashing to the floor as her hands flew to her mouth. Ethan froze, color draining from his face. His keys clattered against the hardwood as his grip failed him. "You," Melanie stammered. You're dead." Daniel tilted his head, lips curling into a thin smile. "Reports of my death," he replied coolly, "were greatly exaggerated." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hall. Daniel let the silence stretch, let the weight of his presence crush them. Then, slowly, he reached behind the chair cushion and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Funny thing," he said, spreading the documents across the coffee table. "While you were planning my funeral, I was reading your little project. Quite the masterpiece. Fake doctor's notes. Forged wills. A timeline for my decline. You even gave it a title, The Daniel Project. Cute." Ethan swallowed hard, his bravado cracking. You don't have proof." Daniel's smile sharpened. "Oh, but I do. Photos, signatures, your fingerprints all over it. And let's not forget," he held up a sleek recorder, its red light blinking. "This conversation, right now." Melanie's knees buckled, but she caught herself on the sofa. Her mask slipped, her grief act gone. "What do you want, Daniel?" she hissed. "I want," Daniel said, rising slowly from the armchair, his shadow stretching across the room, to watch the look on your faces when you realize you never won. You thought shoving me into the ocean ended my story. But it was only the beginning. The empire wasn't theirs. The game wasn't over. Daniel Cole had returned from the dead, and his enemies were standing in his living room, cornered at last. Melanie's breathing was ragged, her hands trembling as she backed toward the mantel, her wide eyes fixed on Daniel as if staring at a ghost. Ethan, though trying to keep a mask of control, looked pale under the living room's golden lights. For the first time, the predators felt like prey. Daniel leaned on the arm of his chair, calm and deliberate, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "You really shouldn't look so shocked," he said, his tone almost conversational. "Did you think the ocean would finish me? Did you think sharks care more about money than loyalty?" Ethan stepped forward, fists clenched. "You can't prove anything. You storm in here with words, but without evidence, it's your word against ours." Daniel's smile deepened. He tapped the sleek recorder in his hand, the red light still blinking. "This device has captured every word you've spoken since you walked through that door. Every admission. Every denial. And in Massachusetts, only one person has to consent to a recording. Guess who that person is?" Melanie's face twisted with rage. "That won't hold up. We'll bury you with lawyers." Daniel shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. "No, you won't. Because I've already delivered copies of your forged documents, your emails, your medical fabrications, and photos of your little Daniel project, to a very particular friend of mine, Danny Crawford. Former FBI. He's been working with me from the start." The words struck like thunder. Ethan's composure shattered. "You set us up." "I prepared," Daniel corrected, his tone sharp. "While you were planning my death, I was planning your downfall. That's the difference between people like you and people like me. You chase money. I build empires. And empires don't collapse because of two greedy cowards with champagne glasses." The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Before Melanie or Ethan could react, the front door burst open. Federal agents swept into the room, weapons drawn, voices commanding, "FBI. Nobody move." Melanie screamed again, stumbling backward into the mantelpiece. Ethan raised his hands instinctively, his face drained of all color. Agent Sarah Chin stepped forward, badge gleaming. Her voice was steady, unflinching. "Melanie Cole. Ethan Ward. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and attempted homicide." Daniel's eyes locked on his wife's. He wanted her to see it, the precise moment her empire crumbled. Melanie's lips trembled, her voice barely above a whisper. You planned this." Daniel straightened, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had survived betrayal and risen stronger. "No, Melanie. You planned my death. I planned your justice." The agents moved swiftly, cuffing Ethan as he cursed and shouted, dragging Melanie to her knees as she sobbed, mascara streaking down her face. Daniel stood motionless, watching silently as the two people who thought they had ended his life were now being marched out of the house like criminals. For a long moment, the room was still again, only the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner. Daniel picked up the empty champagne glass Melanie had left behind, raised it slightly in a mock toast, and whispered to himself. Checkmate. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the benches, their cameras clicking as though every flash could capture the full weight of betrayal that had unfolded. The trial of Melanie Cole and Ethan Ward was not just another high society scandal, it was a story of greed, murder, and a billionaire who had risen from the grave to expose it. Daniel sat in the front row, his posture straight, his tailored suit sharp. He wasn't here as a grieving victim anymore. He was here as a survivor. His testimony had already electrified the court days earlier, how his wife and her lover shoved him off a yacht, how they fabricated medical records, how they attempted to erase his existence for $3 billion. Every word had been supported by evidence, documents from the Daniel Project, Ethan's financial transfers, and, most damning of all, the recordings Daniel had captured the night he confronted them. When the prosecutor replayed Melanie's own words, her whisper of, "Say hello to the sharks," the jury audibly gasped. Ethan's panicked phone call followed, the words, "It's done. The empire is ours," echoing across the courtroom like a death sentence. The defense tried everything, claiming Daniel had dementia, arguing the recordings were doctored, painting Melanie as a manipulated wife. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the mask of innocence had already shattered. Witness after witness, from Daniel's investigator Danny Crawford to financial experts, confirmed the web of lies Melanie and Ethan had spun. On the final day, when the verdict was read, the tension in the air was suffocating. The foreman stood, his voice steady. "For the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendants guilty. For the charge of fraud and attempted homicide, we find the defendants guilty." Melanie collapsed into her chair, her sobs echoing against the walls. Ethan clenched his jaw, his face drained of any arrogance. The judge's gavel came down with finality. "Melanie Cole, Ethan Ward, you are hereby sentenced. 25 years for conspiracy, 20 for attempted murder, and additional years for fraud. These sentences will run consecutively." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, not in joy but in release. Justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him, microphones thrust in his face. "Mr. Cole, how does it feel to know your wife tried to kill you? Do you forgive her?" Daniel paused, his eyes cold but his voice steady. "Forgiveness is for those who make mistakes. They made choices. Choices that cost them their freedom. My answer is simple, I will not waste forgiveness on betrayal." In the weeks that followed, Daniel rebuilt quietly. His board of directors welcomed his return, stabilizing the empire Melanie had almost stolen. The forged documents were shredded, the offshore transfers reversed. And through it all, Daniel stood firm, no longer the man who blindly trusted, but the man who had proven that betrayal could be outmatched with foresight and strength. His legacy was intact. His empire was secure. And for the first time in years, he felt clarity. The empire wasn't just money. It was resilience. It was survival. It was his. 5 months had passed since the verdict, but the echoes of betrayal still lingered like shadows in Daniel Cole's life. The empire was whole again, the market stabilized, the shareholders reassured. Yet wealth, he had come to realize, was the easiest part to recover. Trust, that was far harder. He often returned to his study, the same room where Melanie and Ethan had once plotted his downfall. The leather armchair, polished desk, and towering bookshelves had been restored, but the air felt different now, heavier with lessons carved in pain. On the mantel, beneath his father's portrait, sat the recorder that had captured the confessions. Daniel kept it there as a reminder, not of fear, but of foresight. Jake still visited often, bringing fresh fish and quiet companionship. Sometimes Tyler tagged along, eager to hear more of the story, his youthful awe reminding Daniel that survival itself could inspire. Mrs. Chen sent letters from her bed and breakfast, her handwriting neat, each line laced with wisdom. "Remember, true family is chosen, not inherited." And Danny Crawford remained a trusted ally, his investigations continuing to dismantle other fraud networks that preyed on the vulnerable. As for Melanie and Ethan, their names had become whispers in the prison system. Once adorned in luxury, now reduced to orange jumpsuits and iron bars, they lived in the very cage they had built for Daniel. He didn't visit. He didn't write. Their fate was their final conversation. On quiet evenings, Daniel often found himself standing on the balcony of his penthouse, staring out at the ocean. The waves glimmered under the moonlight, the same waves that had nearly swallowed him. Yet instead of fear, he felt gratitude. The ocean had tried to claim him, but it had also washed him clean, of illusions, of false love, of misplaced trust. He reflected on what mattered most. Money could attract parasites. Power could breed envy. But loyalty, real loyalty, was rarer than diamonds. It was found in people like Jake, who pulled a stranger from the water without asking for anything in return. In Mrs. Chen, who sheltered him without hesitation. In Danny, who risked his career to protect the truth. Family wasn't about bloodlines or marriage contracts. It was about who stood beside you when the world tried to erase you. Melanie had worn the title of wife, but she had never been a partner. Ethan had called himself a colleague, but he had never been a friend. Betrayal had unmasked them. As the waves rolled endlessly below, Daniel whispered into the night, "They thought pushing me off that yacht ended my story. But all it did was show me who I really am, and who my true family is." He turned from the balcony, walking back into his study, his empire secure, his heart tempered with steel. The ocean had tested him. Betrayal had nearly broken him. But Daniel Cole had not only survived. He had triumphed. And in that triumph lay the lesson: wealth can be stolen, but foresight, resilience, and loyalty, those are priceless.